Athletes, take your mark, get set. It's time for the Addict Athlete Podcast. Everybody, Coach Blu Robinson here. I want to thank everyone who's been downloading and listening to the podcast. We are coming up on our 100th episode here shortly, and I'm excited that this is working for you. Please jump on, rate the podcast, leave a review, submit questions. If you have thoughts or concepts or things that you want to have discussed on Team Addict Athletes Podcast, please reach out. We love to interact with all of you. We ask that you tune yourselves and your attention over to our social network, our social media. We're pretty much all over these days. And so if you get stuck or get lost, jump on our website, addicttoathlete.org. There you'll find all kinds of resources, online meeting support groups, links to everything that we do can be found there. And specifically our sober coaching program, all those who want to become a sober coach and open your own chapter of Addict Athlete, all the stuff that you can think of on how to become a chapter of Addict Athlete will be found there. So listeners and viewers alike, I'm excited today because we have a mentor of mine, and it's been kind of neat to be able to get to know him and get to know his story. And for most of us here in Utah, he's a man that we're very familiar with. But for anyone outside of the state of Utah, I think you're going to hear this story and be very intrigued by the concept that we talk about on Addict Athlete about turning a mess into a very powerful message. And today I have Randall Carlisle on the podcast. And Randall, thank you so much for doing this. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the team at large and tell us a little bit about you and how you wound up where you are helping serve your community by helping people with addiction.
Well, thank you for inviting me on. I figured I owed it to you because I should say that Blu was on. I do a podcast called Odyssey House Journals because I work at Odyssey House now. And we had Blu on one of our podcasts that was heavily downloaded and listened to. So you must have some quality of appeal there, Blu.
That's probably you guys. I just get to sit between the two power hitters, which were you and your cohort there. So good stuff. But thank you.
I was an anchor man. Actually, I spent about 40 years in television. I worked in a number of markets, including Minneapolis and Dallas. But I spent my longest period of time here in Utah. I spent 7 years on KUTV back in the 1980s. Then I went away, and then I came back and I spent about 23 years on ABC4 as the main anchor. So. That's right. Then about in 2017, I was doing weekend anchoring at ABC4, and that was during all the craziness that was going on down on Rio Grande, the block, and it was when Operation Rio Grande was just beginning, and there were three phases in that. One was the crackdown on crime. The second was offering rehabilitation or treatment for the people who are arrested, and Odyssey House played a big role in that. And so I found myself covering, and the Rio Grande area was my beat. And so I found myself covering a bunch of news conferences at Odyssey House, and I got to know the people here, and they said, we're looking, because we were such a growing program at the time. They said, we're looking for a media and community relations director. Would you be interested? And it's something, after working in radio and TV for over 40 years, it was, I thought about it, and obviously the pay isn't the same as it is in TV or anything, but I started thinking that, maybe for the last job of my working career, working at a place like this might be rather fulfilling. And so I asked the people. I still had a couple of years left on my contract at Channel 4. I asked them if they would let me out of it and explain why. And they were gracious about it. And I took the job here, and I've been here 2.5 going on 3 years. And I've never been happier. It's wow. It's a different feeling than working in the news media.
Oh, for sure. I mean, with still a lot of the emotions that come along with it too, because that's an interesting leap. Just that feeling of wanting to do something more. And I can just imagine you sitting there, because for those of you who aren't in the state of Utah, what Randall's talking about was this Rio Grande area, which is a depot and an old train stations kind of turned into a modern day kind of like hangout and a mall and whatnot. But it really became a haven to a lot of homeless population, which unfortunately has that cloud of addiction that it hangs around thick. And one day I remember waking up, Addict to Athlete actually went out the weekend before it happened, and we donated a bunch of toiletries and kits and things. And so it was interesting because they come back and reported how sad that situation felt. And so wasn't it kind of a turn of events for the city and them to kind of go like, we got to do something bigger and better here. And it has caused some divide throughout the experience, but through that, you were able to open your eyes to this Odyssey program. For those that aren't familiar, why don't you describe a little bit about what Odyssey is and what you do up there, because it's significant. You guys have a load of very difficult and challenging clientele that really, when they put the effort into it, they turn into amazing contributors to society. So tell us a little bit about Odyssey House before we jump in.
And you know, the one thing I left out, Blue, when I was talking about all this, is that I was a functional alcoholic. The entire, all the decades that I spent in television news. And that's sort of one of the reasons I work here, and one of the reasons you had me on your program. And I should point out, for people who have never watched, or for people out of state, is I never got drunk in the morning, or drank before I went to work, or drank at work. And every night I would go home and drink till I passed out. And I did that for decades. Anyway,
but interesting.
Point,
that's what sparked the fire, though, right? Till now, when you're sitting in here covering all this, the city moving in, trying to get people help, and you're hearing all this stuff, you're like, hey, wait a minute, this could have been me too. So that's what sparked the fire, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I understood, you know, the people down there, because at that point I had gotten sober. And for people who aren't aware of what the block was or anything, it was our largest homeless shelter. And where the homeless people were, there were a bunch of criminals, there were a bunch of drug dealers, and it was open dealing on the street. I went down there almost every day and covered stories, and it was. I went down with wearing a tie, a suit coat, and with a photographer. And I actually had people, the drug dealers would come up to me with a camera, wearing a tie, saying, "Black, white, Chris." Heroin, what was white? Cocaine, and Chris was crystal meth. And I'd say to, and it was so open. It was so shocking to people, especially in a state like Utah. Yeah. It was so shocking. And I'd say to these dealers, I'd say, "Do you know that the guy behind me is rolling his camera right now?
Yeah,
he could be busted." And they'd say, "I don't care, because if I get busted, they'll take me to jail for a day and then release me, because it was just out of control down there." And that's why there was a crackdown. So. What was the other part of
Odyssey?
Odyssey House
what is it?
It's the largest behavioral health treatment center in Utah. We've been around since 1971, and we treat close to 1,000 clients a day. We have, you know, residential programs. We have close to 400 people. Then we have a pretty thriving outpatient program. We have a specific program for mothers with kids and fathers with kids. Those are two of my favorites, because you generally, when somebody is busted for drugs and they have to go to a treatment program, or just when they're busted for drugs, their kids are taken away from them and put into foster care or stay with a relative. Our programs are fairly unique in that we work with DCFS, which is the Division of Family Child Services here in Utah. I keep forgetting about the fact that there are people outside
all over the world, Randall. We got lots of listeners. Yeah.
So they generally would take custody of kids and parents who are busted for some kind of addiction. And our program, we bring the kids in with their parents, either a mom or a dad, and they live in our residential program with the parents. And so we have our own child services department. And so every day, the mothers or the fathers bring their kids down to the child services department, go back to their house, go through their group therapy that they go through every day, pick them up at the end of the day, and then the kids get to stay with them. They cook them dinner in the evening and do evening activities. And the whole goal is to reunify families and not cause so much disruption for the kids. And the kids in our child services program, we have therapists there who work with them, because any child who's living with an addicted parent has gone through some kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And so we work with them dealing with their trauma separately from the parents. And then we work with the parents together with the kids dealing with that trauma. We have an adolescent program. We have a program in the jail that we call CATS, and I can never remember what it stands for, but it's when people go into jail and have a sentence of 3 months or longer, they have an option of entering the CATS program. And it's a number of pods that Odyssey controls in the jail. And so the inmates who sign up for this get to stay in a pod with other inmates who are going through basically the Odyssey treatment program. And so they're not in with the general population. And then if they successfully complete, they get out of jail a little earlier than they would have had they been in general population. So I'm trying to think what else.
And working in the industry of addiction recovery for 20 years now, all over the state, I've always known that Odyssey has been a heavy hitter, and like you guys carry a major load. I had no idea about some of these other additional resources, because just hearing of the mother-child and the father-child programs, that blows my mind because of how important that is. I mean, we want these folks to come in and get treatment and get recovery, but they have responsibilities, and they have these kids that need help too. And holy cow, Randall, I didn't realize that. What an amazing resource to be able to keep families unified and to heal together, because we teach them to be parents, but they've got to be with their kids to become parents. And so that's awesome.
Yeah, it's my favorite program. We're the only treatment center west of the Mississippi that has a Fathers with Kids program.
That's what I was going to say. Very rare.
A lot of places have Moms with Kids program, but there are single dads out there taking care of their kids, and for whatever reason, the mother is not in the picture, and the dads are dealing with an addiction. So,
oh my goodness, and that's the amazing part of this too, is on Team Addict to Athlete. I've and working as a therapist for many years, I've seen dads that have had to step up because mom's really struggling or not doing well. And it's always blown my mind at the level of like fear they have to ask for help, because they're like, we can do this. We're men. We can do this. And I just watch them like trying to give it their all, and they just feel like they can't. I mean, Randall, what an amazing component to that. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I'm proud to work at the place, and I facilitate a Tuesday evening meeting for family support group. People who have loved ones with an addiction, helping the family deal with their own problems, so that because every family that's dealing with an addict has problems, and quite frequently there's too much enabling or not setting of boundaries, and their loved one's addiction becomes their addiction and wrecks their life. It can wreck marriages. It can, it just wreaks havoc in a family. And so we have a meeting every Tuesday night that deals with that as well. So
that's incredible. And I think that you being who you are, I would imagine that when folks come into that group, specifically parents that are struggling, because of who you are and the public eye that you had and still do, they've got to be able to trust you to the certain fact of, what you're talking about. But when they start realizing that, hey guys, I'm right there with them, I struggle too. What does that do for that person who's like, but Randall, I thought you were perfect. I thought you were perfect. I mean, how great of a transition is it for them to say, if I struggled with it, anyone can. I mean, I'll bet you that probably leads them into this like concept of like, now they can really trust you, because not only do they know you, but now they know something about you. How have you used that to like kind of break some of that stigma?
It gives me a lot of street cred with our clients, because I frequently promote positive news stories about what we're doing at Odyssey, and I work with our clients then, and they'll see me and they'll say, "Didn't I see you on TV?" And initially they don't trust me because they say, God, this TV guy here what's he doing here now? And I go and I tell them all my story, and then all of a sudden everybody relaxes and says, oh, well, he understands what I'm going through. And the same thing with the relatives of the addicts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped me to be able to, the only positive side of having been an alcoholic all those years
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that it has helped me do my job here at Odyssey House. When I was in TV, obviously I tried to hide the fact that I mean, nobody wants to hear that the guy they're watching giving the news is a functional alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
But and you bring up stigma, and it took me, I will be going this July, I'll have 8 years clean.
Amazing.
And I went through detox and an IOP program at uni, which for out-of-staters is the University of Utah Neuropsychiatric Institute.
Man.
And IOP is an intensive outpatient program, what it is. And I went through that twice. I'm a slow learner,
Wow.
as most of us who are dealing with addictions are.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to keep all that secret and quiet because I was still working at the time. And it took me about probably I don't know, probably three or 4 years after I got clean before I was willing to talk to other people and admit that, yeah, I was a functional alcoholic. You know, and there's
Wow.
there's a lot of stigma around addicts that people don't realize. And by addict, I include drugs and alcohol.
100%. Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't realize that people can have, I mean, I'm a fine example of that. You can lead what appears to be a normal life, you know, that you're not drunk on the air and slurring words and stuff like that. And there are people who are heroin addicts, as long as they find the heroin so they don't get dope sick, that can go to work and function like a seemingly normal person.
Yeah.
The place that it hurt me wasn't professionally, it was personally. I went through 4 wives, and all of them told me I was an alcoholic, and I denied it and said, no, I just drink a lot to deal with all the stress of my job. And therefore, and because of the fact that I drank at home and didn't drink during the daytime when I was at work, when I was home, which is the time I would have been with my wife of the day, I was never present. And for people who don't understand that, I mean, it'd be like you and I could be having this conversation, and I really wouldn't be listening to what you're saying, or it's just somewhere out there wondering, where am I going to get my next drink? And you tell me your problems, and I go, oh, that's nice. Now, where am I going to get my next drink?
Exactly.
And people don't realize that with the addiction, which is a disease, which they have to understand it's a disease, your primary focus at the time you're deep into your addiction is fulfilling your brain's desire to get that substance back in your body.
Absolutely.
And so what that does is it wipes out your interpersonal relationships because you're not there.
You're on autopilot, and I can totally understand that too. It's like when you've got so much weight that you're carrying around, the emotions, the stress of the job, everything. I mean, you carry yourself in a way by which, as long as no one can see, no one will know. And I think that's probably one of those stigmas that don't just happen here in the state of Utah. It happens all over the place. Sure. But because you were never in the public eye, and unfortunately we have another newscaster that happened to, and I've been kind of heartbroken by some of the folks that don't understand the concept and some of the emotional attacks that have been made on her behalf. And I think, you guys don't understand this. I mean, it's easy for you to be an armchair counselor and say, let's throw the book at her and all this. You don't know the complexities of this. And it breaks my heart because you get it and I get it. And so when we see someone that's struggling like we have in the past, and unfortunately has come out so public, like the way that it happened, it's heartbreaking when we start realizing that, no, there's something bigger at play here. It's not the fact that it's out there like, like running and gunning. I'm trying to like ruin my life. It's like, you guys don't understand the complexities of this addiction, this disease. Right. And the disease says, hey, you're totally fine. Get behind the wheel. And so when you hear this kind of stuff, when you see the public eye, the figures in the public eye start to waver and falter, doesn't that just kind of crush your heart too, because you know the magnitude of what it means?
Sure. Well, it wrecks a career. I mean, and you mentioned one female. There actually were two main female anchors
That's
just
right.
within the last year who lost their jobs because they got arrested for DUIs.
Mm-hmm.
And there, but for the grace of God, went I. What I did, because I was well. All of us who are TV anchors have morals clauses in our contract,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously a DUI violates the morals clause,
Yeah.
and so I wisely, I guess, or it seemed like wise at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
I moved. I've lived downtown in Salt Lake City for a long time because I could walk to all the bars and clubs that I wanted to go to.
Yeah.
And when I was married, my wives were all really enablers because if they said, we've been invited to a party or we've been invited here, any place that where they were going to serve alcohol, I'd say, if you'll drive, I'll go with you. But if you won't drive, I won't go because I don't want to get
Mm-hmm.
arrested for a DUI. So
Yeah.
the only thing that I was sensible about was not driving drunk. So,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
but but for the people that you mentioned, I mean, and I was really close to one of the female anchors who
Mhm.
lost her job, and it's sad because you sort of ruin your career, and
Mhm.
you certainly lose a fair amount of money.
Mhm.
And what for?
Yeah.
And you're and what people don't understand, I remember the last time I relapsed because I went through the uni program once and stayed clean for 9 months, and then I
Mhm.
relapsed. And I remember, and I'm not dumb. I may not have genius IQ, but I'm not dumb. And I remember saying to myself, and this is, and you can relate as well, and I'm sure anybody who's dealt with addictions can relate, is the addict brain talking. I said to myself,
Mhm.
I've been clean for 9 months and I bet I could have a beer or two. And I
Yeah.
went to a bar and I had one beer and I said, well, yeah, okay, I'm okay. And then I had
Okay.
another beer
Mhm.
and I said, and I remember thinking, you know, this is okay. I can keep drinking.
Yeah.
And till I drank till I was, blackout drunk again.
Right.
And it was, and at the time I thought it made sense. And I guess one thing I'd like people to know who don't understand addiction is that when you're in the addiction, what makes sense to you doesn't make sense to anyone else, but it's making total sense to you at the time.
Well said. You're right. And what was the result of that great thought process and thinking? What was the outcome? What happened?
Yeah, well, I relapsed
You relapsed.
and so I felt bad about it.
Yeah.
And here's another addict attitude is I thought, well, I've screwed up. I've screwed up already. I was not clean. I was clean for 9 months. I'm screwed up. So I might as well just keep drinking for a while.
Yep.
You
Full
know,
throttle. Yep.
yeah. And it's our minds, it's a disease of the brain.
Mhm.
And if people could only understand that, it would remove some of the stigma because initially, and I agree that people will say perhaps you were morally weak because you started drinking or you used drugs for the first one or two times or something. But when it becomes the disease, the addiction, it
Mhm.
has nothing to do with morals. It's
Mhm.
totally a physical disease. And if people would, if I told you, if I just ran into you on the street and I said I have diabetes and I have to give myself an injection every day, you might say, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad you have everything under control. But you would
Yeah.
never say what a loser you are because you've got to give yourself an injection every day. And
Exactly.
or if I told you I had cancer, you'd say, God, I'm so sorry to hear that. But if I
Mhm.
tell you I'm an addict,
It's
very few people
whoa.
say, yeah,
Mhm.
it's like, whoa, you're a dangerous person. You're somebody to avoid. And that's not the case. What
Mm.
addicts need is support and help.
Absolutely. Well, and I guess that leads me to maybe a question for you with some specific insight. And you mentioned that part of that alcohol, consumption was because of some of the stress, and we talk about other, newscasters that have had the same kind of, downfall. And we may not understand the complexities of what you're dealing with in that high stress environment and the public eye and, the news that you're getting and the things that you're doing. I mean, each person has their own amount of stress they carry, but there must be something that you all carry that's kind of uniformly like emotional based because of maybe the stuff that you're seeing. I mean, Randall, I'll be honest with you, I don't watch too much news because of that. Like it's too heavy on my heart. I mean, this now, you hear these stories in real life, in real time, and you're like, ugh. But then kind of being bombarded by all that stuff too. I mean, I guess the pressure must be a lot heavier than most people think because of how maybe common it is. And my question is, when you decided to start cleaning up and have 8 years of sobriety, the last 3, I can understand completely why you stay clean. I mean, you see the message and the power behind helping. But how did you cope with all that stuff without drinking? When you decided to put it away, you still had the same amount of stress. You still had the same amount of like baggage you had to carry. How did you channel it? What did you do?
People think that anchor people are treated like kings and queens in a newsroom.
Yeah.
And in the old days, we were overpaid. I mean, but I wasn't about to turn it down.
No.
It's not so much the case now. But what people don't understand is that almost every newsroom, and I've been in a bunch of them, worked in different cities and everything. So I'm not just talking about one, is they're all run by fear and intimidation. And you rarely ever get an attaboy saying that was a good newscast, or it's always, and I'm not quite sure why that is. And it's not a smart way to run an organization, but they're all run like that. So you get off the air thinking you had a good newscast or something. You get a phone call from the news director saying that newscast sucked, and there's somebody who wants your job, who's working in the newsroom right now, who will get your job unless you start doing things differently. And so there's never any positive reinforcement. And that's a hard thing to deal with because it leaves you feeling very insecure. And then to feed into that is, and I joke about why I like Odyssey better than working in TV, is that in TV, everyone wants somebody else's job.
Yeah.
Think about it.
It makes sense.
The reporter wants to be an anchor. The person on the assignment desk wants to be a reporter. And so what happens when you have an environment where everybody wants somebody else's job, there's an awful lot of backstabbing and gossip and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it makes it it's not a very pleasant working environment. Then to deal with that, I mean, there's a lot of heavy drinking and drug use that goes on in the TV industry. And I don't know whether that's because people are trying to cope with it or whatever, but it seems to be, we got invited to freebies, free cocktail parties, free restaurant openings, and there was alcohol always being served. And so it was very common in any newsroom I ever worked in, when you were done for the day, say, hey, let's go out for a drink at the bar. And in the 3 years I've worked at Odyssey, I've never heard one person say, let's go out for a drink when the day is done.
Go figure. Yeah. At a job where you could probably totally justify it. It's like, no, we do things very different. You bring up a huge point. Just recently I was able to interview Tim Ryan and his wife, Jennifer Jimenez, and what they were talking about. Jennifer has been in the movie industry for years, and she jokes about how she was in the movie Blow. And I'm thinking that's kind of interesting for someone who struggled with addiction. And the things that she said that she had to go through, and the stress and the schmoozing and all that kind of stuff, it broke my heart to hear that. Thus the reason, Randall, when I hear and I read these trolls, we'll call them the internet trolls, that pick apart some of those those cast, those reporters that really have public downfalls, man, it makes me so frustrated and angry, because I'm like, you guys aren't seeing the whole picture. You're looking at one thing and you're thinking, well, now that's an easy target. And I think I feel bad for those people that think that they have, the armchair like therapist or judge and jury, because they don't understand the whole concept. I mean, that's, like it or not, you have a public downfall, you're in the public eye, you're going to get the people like, well, I knew it and too good to be true. And I think, guys, if you would just open your heart a little bit more and see that, man, this is an opportunity for you to serve them, and maybe to reach out and say, hey, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Can you imagine how society, how humanity would like completely begin to start healing if we stopped picking apart people for their downfalls? I mean, for their shortcomings.
And that's, part of Odyssey House is if you talk to any recovering or even any addict or alcoholic who has any knowledge of our program, it's known as one of the toughest programs to go through.
I've heard that. I've been in the industry. I've been in competition with Odyssey House.
Right.
I've always heard that they do have a very high standard.
And we have all these rules, and we have, you have to do a lot to get through the Odyssey program. And for those who embrace it, it works very well. And lots of times, if people don't embrace it, they leave or they get thrown out because they were breaking the rules. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that from the top on down at Odyssey, the one thing we don't do is we never berate somebody. We always find, if somebody screws up somehow, it's not, what a loser you are, that kind. And that's the way it was in TV. But in our organization, it's how, what do you think caused you to do this, and how could we work to make this better in the future? Yeah. And that even applies, and that's sort of obvious when you're dealing with a client who has an addiction issue, but that's the way top management deals with the entire staff as well. And
precisely,
and if there was, and we have a process in Odyssey called encounters, and basically it's for clients, if they observe somebody breaking a rule or doing something that doesn't work in one of our residential houses, they write on a little piece of paper, and it has to be about feelings. And it'd be like, Blu, when you asked me this question, it made me feel very insecure and felt like you were belittling me. Mm-hmm. And so the therapists in the houses will collect these little Post-it notes with the encounters on, and in front of everybody, they start reading the encounters, and they'll have me and you. If I was encountering you, mm-hmm. they'd have us stand up in front of the group, and I would read that to you, and then you would look at me and you'd say, I don't know what you would say, but it would be like, that was not my intent to belittle you. I was just trying to get to the bottom of this, and I really apologize if that's the way you felt, and I won't let it happen again. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of that is to engage in civil dialogue when you have a disagreement with somebody or when somebody bothers you, and to open up about your feelings, because it's always feelings. It's not. It's the question you asked me made me feel this way, as opposed to, mm-hmm. that was a stupid question you asked me. There's a difference.
Yeah. Well, it's a two-side story for what it sounds like. It's like the person being able to learn how to express themselves, which we need more people in addiction to do, instead of like running to the substance to cover that feeling, to be able to express what you just said kind of felt like you were attacking me. And then the other person saying, oh my gosh, you know what? That's just the way I communicate. I've never really been talked about with that. You're right. Like, I could see how that's aggressive. And so I would imagine that would be the goal, is to have some conflict resolution, to say, guys, you can get through conflict. Most addicts don't like conflict. They don't want to fight. And so it makes sense why you'd show up and say, hey, in a safe environment, in an emotionally safe environment, which they don't have access to out there in the street or in an abusive home, you're giving them the opportunity and platform to do that resolution. And I can imagine what that does for them when they find out that we can work this out without swinging or without, taking it personal and go out and using. Like, that's powerful stuff.
Sure it is. And the thing that's really cool about it is that the same process works for all the employees at Odyssey House. Yeah. So in other words, I'm in administration, and if my CEO does something that upsets me or whatever, I can write an encounter, and they have an executive leadership team meeting every Tuesday, and you can write an encounter and go before that executive leadership team, and nothing is held. See, if you did something like that at a TV station, you'd be risking an awful lot. But
Oh man, yeah.
I've done several encounters, and nothing is held against you. And if they deem it to be valuable or perhaps would improve our process or procedures, then they say, thank you for sharing this.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a wonderful way to work out any differences and possibly improve the process of the organization that you're working in.
So, and that's the thing is I take that into society, into humanity. And listeners, maybe this is a practice that you begin to do with your own families too, and because that's the concept. You start looking at these internet trolls that go back and forth. When Addict to Athlete has a program in the Conquest program at the prison. And I remember when we did our very first 5K, and these guys, man, they built this track around the inside of the fence. And when I got there, I thought, oh, the state of Utah has built them this amazing track, and I can't wait to see this collegiate level track. And no, these guys went out there with like rakes and shovels and just smoothed this pad out. It's just dirt, but it was amazing because they took such care into it. And I said, the most exclusive 5K you'll ever run, right? Because you got to be in there.
Yeah.
And I'm running with these guys, and I'm hearing their stories. They're talking about how running and Addict to Athletes helping them feel free. And I have this huge positive experience. They run the story, and then all of a sudden all the trolls, they release them to go out and run. Oh, these guys should be locked up. I'm like, you dummies. But what if they really kind of like got up there and they stated what was really going on? Like,
Sure.
hey, I have someone that hurt me that's in prison, and seeing this kind of brings up, should they be having fun? And maybe I need to be a little bit more forgiving on my side, do whatever, but we can't do that as society. So the fact that you teach that is huge because they've got to get in tune with what's going on in here. And the recipient needs to know that, hey, there's a more excellent way to deliver that than maybe the style that you're using, because I'll listen to you. You don't have to control or fight talk me. I'll hear you. So Randall, I like that a lot. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Actually, you just brought up, doing it. You don't have to be an addict or anything, but wouldn't that be great in family meetings if you said, okay, here in Utah, the predominant religion encourages a family home evening on Monday night.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be cool if during the week you wrote you wrote your encounters, because my sister Jill bothered me because she did, and then you peacefully and in a non-combative style read all the had them present their encounters at the family gathering.
Yeah, can you imagine, like in a family system, like the administration, when a kid says to a parent, hey, Dad, you said you were going to be home in time to take me to this place and you weren't, and you do this quite often. What the heck? The dad can't,
share your feeling on that too, because it makes me feel like I can't rely on you, or you don't love me, and then I feel insecure. So
absolutely. And Randall, I bring that up because that's one that I had to have with my kids. They're like, Dad, you always say we're going to do these cool things, and then you're always busy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are right. I got to be careful with what I say. And so I know it works because we've done that. But you're right. There's so many family systems that don't dare point out parental flaws or feelings or fears because they're afraid they're going to get repressed and pushed down. So you're teaching great principle there. I love that concept. And listeners, again, that's the kind of stuff that you want to take to heart and kind of get into practice because it's huge. So Randall, I guess maybe the one thing I'm curious about too is, again, the public eye and all this kind of stuff. When you finally decided to raise your hand and say, I have functioning alcoholic here, I'm guilty as charged. What was the step out of the anonymity? What was the step out of that like for you? I mean, were you nervous? Were you kind of like, this is
out of my mind.
Yeah.
I was afraid of the judgment that would come down. I used to MC a lot of events, and now I speak to a lot of people about recovery. But and people are shocked to hear that I was a functional alcoholic all those years, and I never really. There weren't very few people who were negative about it. Mostly people will say, "Thank you for sharing that," and it opened my eyes and I'm glad you're sober now.
Mhm.
And I'm glad I didn't know you when you weren't.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and it's actually been pretty positive, but it was my fear more than, and it was unfounded fear actually. Now that I
Mhm.
look back on it, that I wasn't really harshly judged as long as you come clean in a logical and a way that people can relate to. Uh,
Mhm.
and I sort of feel like I can bridge the gap because I was this visible character. And the comments usually, if they first hear that I was a functional alcoholic, they'll say, well, God, you did a really good job on the air for being drunk, you know.
Yeah, you're like,
Well,
ah.
I
Mhm.
wasn't drunk when I was on the air. I respected my job. I respected the TV audience. I just didn't respect myself when I went home at
Mhm.
night, you know.
Yeah, took it out on yourself. Absolutely. And I remember one of the things we talked about when I did your podcast was, me being a bishop. And I remember one time we were doing a radio interview with KBYU, and we were at BYU studios. And it was funny because as we were talking about Addict to Athlete, and as that came out and stuff, the reporter kind of stopped and said, "Does your congregation know that you were?" I'm like, "They better, because I have a big sticker in the back of my car that says Addict to Athlete, and I talk about it all the time, and I'm very much open about it." And it was funny because it was that same kind of concept. It was like, what happens when everyone knows? And I'll tell you, and you've probably seen the same thing, because of the honesty and because of the understanding and because of the progression now. People come out all the time and say, "Man, if you can do it, maybe I can do it." And how neat is that there's an inspiration now that's completely different than
Mhm.
just being in the public eye, but now you're giving them like real genuine counsel to like erase it and replace it with something better. I mean, how does that compare to the best story, the most interesting people you've met? Because I'm sure you've met some amazing people, but
Oh,
how does it feel to be
yeah.
sitting with somebody who's recovering from heroin, that you're like, "I'm here for you right now. You're the most important person in the world to me." What's that
Uh,
like for you?
and I feel really good about all that because I covered, boy, I've broken some big stories and interviewed some important people, presidents, rock stars.
Mhm.
Um, I was at Kent State during the shootings,
Oh man, wow.
and I and I was always intrigued by those stories because I've always been inquisitive. But I can tell you that nothing is as rewarding as and I've grown. We're not supposed to really get to know our clients that well, I guess, or interact with them. But because of the fact that I'm the go-to guy, like if a TV station is doing a story on meth addiction is on the rise or something, they'll call me up and they'll say, "Do you have a meth addict in recovery who would do a TV interview?" And because of that, I go into our houses and I talk to people because they have to sign a release because we obviously protect
Hmm.
the anonymity of
Yeah.
all of our clients. So they sign a release, and then I take them somewhere to meet a TV reporter or a newspaper reporter, and I get to know them. And I've gotten close to several people who have gone through our program, and there's nothing more rewarding than I would trade an exclusive, wonderful news story any day to see somebody recover who had
Hmm.
gone through 20 or 30 years of hell and is now a productive person, and they're back together with their family, that kind of stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
there, I had, I had her on a podcast, and I can use her name because she's very proud of it. And a
Hmm.
lady named Beverly Martinez,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
when she was 12 or 13, she and another girl were gang raped. Her friend died after that, and
Oh,
she started using drugs for several decades. And she
yeah.
got busted just a couple of years ago delivering meth. She rode with I can't remember, the Sundowners motorcycle gang, and
Wow.
she called herself Barbarian Bev, and she rode with a bottle of whiskey between her breasts with a Slurpee straw going up to her mouth, riding a big Harley down the street in a miniskirt. And she did that all the time.
Just
That creates
constant.
an image, right? And
Hmm.
she got in fights all the time and beat up people all the time. And she was just a hardcore woman. She
Hmm.
got busted for delivering meth. And like, say she got busted in the fall, and her court date for some reason wasn't until the spring. and she voluntarily, and she was looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison, and she voluntarily went into Odyssey House. Yeah, because some people would say, well, I'm going to stay high until my trial and then I'll go into prison because I got 10 years in front of me. She
Yep.
went into Odyssey House, got clean, and really embraced the program. And because she did so well, and because of the therapists at Odyssey House recommended her for, it was called a federal prison diversion program. I think it's called UACT or something like that. And she was one of 12 people selected for that. And so when she went to trial, she was put in that program, and she never did serve prison time. And she's on probation for, I don't know, the rest of her life or something,
Yeah.
but she goes around speaking about how wonderful life is now, and how she, and to see somebody like that. She spoke to our family support group this past Tuesday.
Wow.
And to see somebody like that and doing those things is worth more than 100 exclusive news stories, because it's just and the light that shines in her eyes now, compared to, she's shown me her mug shots and everything the million times she was busted, and it was just like this flat look in her eyes. And now she's got this sparkle and this big smile, and she's just, and that one person to me it's so fulfilling and rewarding, and it's so much more important than a big news story.
You know what? I mean, so well said. And just hearing probably that heart of change that she had, and being able now to literally like teach from unfortunately years of example, but now the compare and contrast. I mean, that's what is amazing about what happens when we use the correct principles, when we allow help to kind of come in. The things that we're destined to do, that sole purpose that we discover. Randall, this is why you are where you are. I mean, you could have had to, finish your career off there, but instead you got called to a higher calling. And I think that's, to me, I'm thinking that's that step 12 at its absolute best. It's being able to carry that message to people that, would probably not believe in themselves if it wasn't for a circumstance or a situation or an individual that says, you're better than this, turn the mess into a message, step up, you can do this. And once that fire's lit, it's amazing to see what happens. Even if there's a problem, even if there's a relapse, it's like, no, you step back up, get off your knee, step back up, and you move forward. And I don't know, brother, I just have a ton of respect for you, because from the moment I met you and just watching some of the social media stuff you're doing, I love the fact that you get it so profoundly, because your heart is in it. Like, this is, like you said, you didn't come into it for the money. That's not what we do, social work and this kind of stuff. You did it now because you feel that human connection of like, it's worth living. And thank you for
the best feeling I've ever had.
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
It's a great way to end my working career. And I go home every night and I'm happy and I sleep well, and it's just, and seeing people and people, and as well as I do, that there's a lot of failure as well. I wouldn't call it failure, but because every day of sobriety is a day of sobriety and a step towards recovery. But there are a lot of people who don't embrace it and fall by the wayside, and some of them die, some of them end up behind bars, and that's sad. But for the people who do succeed, it's just it's so miraculous.
It is. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And maybe as we begin to wrap up here, I'll tell you this before we wrap up. And that's, I was talking about this on our Tuesday afternoon, or Tuesday meeting for Addict to Athlete. And we were talking about what's your why, and why do this in the first place. And it was interesting because it quickly turned to a situation where we lost one of our athletes last week to an overdose. And it's so sad, but I said, you guys, you understand what this means? And I told them about a story about when I was, early in my career as a substance abuse counselor before I was a therapist. And I was like 2002, and I was working with youth, and the Mothers Against Drunk Driving came to speak to our youth group. And I also thought it was interesting that the Mothers Against Drunk Driving president at the time was a guy. So I thought, well, what's this about? But nonetheless, he said something so profound. And here's me, a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed like counselor, getting ready to like save the world. And mind you, 2002. And he said, look, this is what's going to happen. For everyone that struggles with addiction, they're going to fall into this rule of thirds. He said 1/3 of everyone who uses drugs or alcohol, they're going to have the experience, they're going to get the help, and they're going to be just fine. They're going to make it. And he said the next third are going to be obviously in and out of jails, in and out of treatment, in and out of relationships. They're just going to have a rough life with periods of sobriety and then long stints of addiction. And it's just going to rule their life. And he said the last third, they're going to die in the addiction, whether it's accidental overdose, an accident, a health related issue because of that. He says, but it will take them. And I remember sitting back thinking, you're full of it. 2/3 of that really kind of sucks. You're telling me that my whole career is going to be based on 1/3. I'm like, I'm going to show you. Years later, I started seeing that come to fruition where, we have the opiate epidemic. And Randall, there was a time when we were losing them. You remember this, you've covered the stories, you've seen it. We were losing people so fast, and it got me to thinking like, oh my gosh, this is what it is. And so I sat there with my athletes who were at this meeting on Tuesday, and I said, look, as hard as this is, and Rudy lost the battle, and I know that wasn't his intention. I said, but you have to understand that he gave you a gift to be one of the other 2/3, because he lost his battle. You now can be one that's either going to be in it for the rest of your lives, but you're going to be here and there'll be that potential, or you'll be the ones that get it and make it. And when we started looking at that side of the coin, it's like, we shouldn't drown our sorrows or try to take away from what Rudy was for us, or for the 12 athletes that I've had since 2011 when we started that's passed away. It's like, you guys are giving you a gift. They're giving you a gift to be the other 2/3. And the way that we kind of looked at that, like, how lucky are we, like you, me, that we get to be part of that number of like carrying the message, staying around long enough to share that, and really being thankful for every day we wake up and get to help more. I mean, I think that's your friend, I think that's exactly the way she sees it too. It's like, what a gift, huh?
And what a way to look at things. That's a great explanation. I also want
Mm-hmm.
to compliment you, because the one thing we haven't talked about is what physical exercise does for an addict in recovery. And
Yeah.
we work with a recovery gym up here.
Yeah.
uh,
Fit to recover, I think, is what you guys
Recover,
do.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great
And
program.
everybody in our residential facilities goes there, I think twice a week or something. And we have workout exercise equipment within our residential houses, because
Yeah.
we recognize the need that you guys fulfill. That, I mean, you can't just sit there and say, I won't drink, I won't drug, I won't drink, I won't drug, and here's
Mm-hmm.
why. But with physical exercise, it makes it a little easier to recover.
Oh, for sure.
So
And
good job.
what's funny about it all is when I first started this and we were, running and doing the couch to 5K, getting them up to speed. I remember them telling me all these stories about themselves, and I thought, I'm breaking new ground here. I'm uncovering some kind of amazing therapeutic modality. It ended
Mhm.
up just being what, EMDR, right? It's the,
Right,
eye movement desensitization and
right.
reprocessing. It's just how you process trauma. Our bodies are meant to move. And that's why it was probably time for you to get out from behind the desk and move into this career. So it's kind of a cool thing, Randall. But last thing, what do you tell that person who just doesn't think that they've got it in them, that just thinks that they are just typecast into this character, which is the addict, who doesn't know or believe that recovery is possible? What do you tell that person who's kind of given up and kind of in that self-doubt?
First of all, you have to want something other than what you have. Nobody will
Perfect.
succeed going through a. If do you want sobriety? Do you want recovery? Because if you don't, then just stay out and do what you're doing, because you're going to waste your time and our time and everybody else's time. But people do
Yeah.
care about you, and there's a whole group of people who may not know you, but do care about the problems that you're going through, and will support you, and will love you, and we won't berate you, and we'll offer you all the opportunities in the world. And here's a list, and here are the people who have recovered, and this is, and they were in your shoes, and they said they couldn't do it either, and they did. And so it is possible. And but bottom line is, you have to want to make a change, and you have to be willing to work for it, or it won't happen, because it's very hard work
Mhm.
to deal with an addiction, and it's
Yes.
not easy. And but the bottom line is, and I do believe this, is that people who have an addiction, who have recovered and are in long-term recovery, are stronger people than people who never had an addiction and didn't have to recover.
I'm 100% with you.
And it's just, to me, it's an amazing, miraculous thing. Recovery is, but you have to work and you have to want it. But it can be, anybody can do it. If you have those two components, that you want it and you're willing to work, you can do it.
You can do it and remain teachable throughout the experience, and that's what you get. So thank you. Listeners, you've been well fed today. Randall, thank you. If people want to get in touch with you, with Odyssey, what's the best way that they do that? How do they contact, the resources? What's the best way?
They can go to odysseyhouse.org to look at our website. And so it's in Odyssey, everybody spells it wrong. It's a hard word.
Yeah.
Odyssey. Okay.
Awesome.
Look at the S screwed up. Or just contact me here. And it's R Carlisle, like you see. Is that on this? Can people see on the screen that says there on the lower left-hand side? Okay, it's that at odysseyhouse.org.
Awesome. And we'll put some links in this for you listeners to get in touch if this is something that you feel like you need to be a part of, or if you have a loved one that's struggling. They are in Salt Lake City, Utah. And like you heard at the beginning, the programs and the things they offer, and really to kind of again, get you guys back on the path of sobriety to heal from this. And if you have family systems that need this recovery, stuff, look them up. I have a lot of faith in Randall and that team up there at Odyssey. So, I want to thank all those who participate, who download and share this podcast. Jump on our social media outlets, our YouTube channels, check out all of our content. And want to thank Radio Ronin, Jimmy Chunga, Josh, Spencer, and Chandler for all that you do on the Radio Ronin network to allow Addict to Athlete to be part of their Radio Ronin family. And check out their podcast as well. They got some good stuff. You can run to their music and you can laugh at their goofy jokes because they're good people. So nonetheless, athletes, Randall, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here today. It's awesome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again. We should
absolutely
more than just visit on podcasts.
We should do that more often. I think so. We could change the world, all of us together. And by doing so, athlete, you'll help turn the mess into a message.